I would like us to talk a bit about current Palestinian affairs and the statehood that is being promoted and pushed. By the looks of it, we're going to have a substantial number of countries recognizing Palestine in just a few weeks' time, even though the Palestinians are not given visas to get to the UN. But I think that we cannot understand that unless we talk a little bit about what conforms Palestinian politics and the spectrum. A bit of me thinks, and I might be wrong in this, but most of the people I encounter around me during these last 2 years, if most of them, what they know about Palestinian politics is that we have Hamas, obviously. I mean, they are the most prominent resistance group in Gaza. Some know about Fatah, but then that's it. And I've had people actually asking me, but isn't Fatah and the PLO the same thing? Isn't the PLO and the PA the same thing? So, do you think you could...
I can try.
Yes, please. Give us a little explanation.
Sure. Okay, so kind of brief version. In 1964, there were these negotiations around water rights to the rivers that are around Palestine. And the Arab states needed someone to speak on behalf of Palestinians. So they set up something called the Palestine Liberation Organization. It was actually founded in a hotel in East Jerusalem with the King of Jordan sitting in the front row. And the guy that they decided would be the head of this organization was a Palestinian who was Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United Nations. So a career diplomat who had worked for the Saudis, who was a compromise candidate between the Saudis and the Egyptians, who were the kind of two big Arab states at the time. This was never supposed to be an organization with any kind of fangs or power. It was just supposed to parrot whatever Egypt and Saudi told him to say. The 1967 war comes, and all of these Arab states who had been like King Konging and saying, we're going to liberate Palestine, get devastated. Within 6 days, Israel defeats them and destroys the Egyptian Air Force on the first day, and so on. In the meanwhile, in the 1960s, a group of Palestinian student activists had begun to create formations. The two really important formations, one emerged in Lebanon, in Beirut, and another emerged in Cairo. The one that emerged in Beirut was called the Movement of Arab Nationalists, and they believed that the path to liberating all of the Arab world was through Arab unity, was through a kind of pan-Arab unity. This wasn't a new idea. They weren't the only people talking about this. There's several factions from all over the Arab world that spoke in the language of anti-imperialist liberation takes the form of pan-Arab unity. This effectively replaces something that existed before this, which was a pan-Islamic movement, which was really empowered by the Khilafat movement in India. And I mean, this is a big, long history lesson that we don't necessarily need, but basically you have this kind of pan-Arabist trend under something called the Movement of Arab Nationalists that then after 1967 kind of splits into focus areas. So for instance, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Oman and the Arabian Gulf, which fought in Oman, fought against the British stooge government in Muscat, and waged a really important revolutionary moment in Oman that's been completely forgotten now. And very much kind of also allied and tied with the socialist movement in Yemen, which gave us that socialist republic of in South Yemen. And something called the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine was another kind of focus area that emerged from the movement of Arab nationalists. So these were people who believed that the liberation of Palestine is actually contingent on destroying the dictatorships around the Arab world. The way that they would frame it, for instance, is that the road to Jerusalem passes through Amman, through Jordan. But Amman here stands in for all of the Arab capitals where you have a dictatorship. It's not just specifically about Jordan. Actually in 1967, 1968, they adopt Marxism-Leninism as a kind of guiding set of principles and effectively become the main Palestinian socialist communist organization. The group that forms in Cairo actually emerges from the Muslim Brotherhood movement. There are people who are attending the Muslim Brotherhood meetings, again, student activists, and they were, I'm going to be a bit facetious here and say, blessed with this leadership figure called Yasser Arafat, who was a very shrewd political player and very smart at raising money and very smart at giving promises and appearing non-threatening to Arab regimes and Arab billionaires and things like this. So he managed to build a very well-resourced organization off the principle of I will never interfere in your business if you are, Kuwait or Jordan or Saudi or whatnot, or Egypt. And actually, it's really in Kuwait where this organization really gets its start and becomes known as the Palestine Liberation Movement, in Arabic, Harakat Tahrir al-Falastiniya, which has the initials Hatafa. Hatif doesn't sound good in Arabic, so they flip it. So it becomes Fatah. So this is what gives us Fatah, and it's founded around the same time. And Fatah manages to use these resources to set up very large military training camps in Jordan and in Syria. One of these camps in the Jordan Valley was set up near a Jordanian village called El-Karame, which means dignity. And in March 1968, the Israelis invaded Jordan to try to wipe out this training camp. And the fighters, the guerrilla fighters of Fatah and some of its allied groups, with support from a Jordanian artillery unit, managed to push back and defeat effectively this Israeli invasion. And so this becomes known as the Battle of Al-Karame, Ma'arak Al-Karame, and it changes everything. Because basically every single Palestinian in the world hears the news of the Battle of Karame and wants to join the commandos. And so in the thousands, the tens of thousands, people even in Europe and North America start flying to Jordan to start joining the training camps of the commandos. The different factions set up different training camps. And then also this is, the late 60s. This is the peak moment of anti-colonial movements globally. And so you have Tamils joining, you have Kurdish fighters joining, you have Sudanese fighters joining. Some of them come to give training, some come to receive training, some come as individuals to join the Palestinian movement, some come as movements to come and train with the Palestinians and take this experience back home to fight for Tamil liberation in Sri Lanka, to fight for Kurdish liberation in Turkey and Kurdistan in general, and so on, right? So this is kind of a peak moment of a global revolutionary moment. Obviously, imperial powers get very stressed out about this, and so Jordan is put at the front lines of destroying it. And so in 1970, the Jordanian monarchy reorganizes the Jordanian military, and then with Israeli, American, and even one Pakistani general's support, Zia al-Haq, who later becomes the head of state in Pakistan, go to complete war against this revolutionary presence in Jordan. They commit a very large number of massacres. Most of the fighting is centered on the Palestinian refugee camps in Jordan. Arafat agrees to a withdrawal of his forces up to the woodlands around Jarash in northern Jordan. And in 1971, the Jordanian Air Force and military come in and wipe out most of those fighters. And until today, if you go walk in those woodlands, you'll find evidence of that massacre. There's unmarked mass graves all around the Kingdom of Jordan. I don't know if anyone is ever going to find them and talk about them. But the important thing is that right in the kind of like period of Al-Karame, these militant factions come in and take over that toothless organization called the Palestine Liberation Organization to turn it into an actual liberation organization. So the PLO is restructured to actually be a Palestinian government and leading and representative body in exile. And it's structured very, very democratically, actually. So the highest decision-making body of the PLO is something called the Palestine National Council, which operates as a parliament. Palestinians can be represented in the PLO in two ways simultaneously. One, through whoever it is that represents them on the Palestine National Council, but also through the unions. So you had the General Union of Palestinian Students, the General Union of Palestinian Workers, the Union of Women, the Union of the Disabled, the Union of the Writers and Journalists, the Union of the Artists, and a large number of unions where, again, you could also be, like if you're a disabled woman who's a journalist and a worker, you might be a member of 4 unions, right? if you're an ex-prisoner, the Fifth Union, and so on. And so this was the PLO, but also kind of like really the linchpin of this organization, and by design, Yasser Arafat manages to kind of put himself as the key sort of kingmaker and playmaker of this organization. And it's through a set of historical events that this happens. The most important of which is that after 1971, after the expulsion of the fighters from Jordan, Arafat comes to the kind of conviction that the armed struggle will never liberate Palestine. And so he does a switch of strategy between 1971 and 1974, which is, and I mean, you know, now it maybe sounds ridiculous. It definitely still sounds ridiculous to me, but at the time maybe it made sense, which is we need to convince the United States to be our main ally in creating a Palestinian state, right? So they basically switch the goal of Palestinian liberation from the liberation of Palestine from settler colonialism to along the path of pan-Arabism and Arab unity, to the establishment of a Palestinian state. Prior to 1970, nobody ever in the Palestine liberation movement ever spoke about Palestinian statehood. This is a thing that we've forgotten. But I learned it from Ghassan Kanafani, who wrote an article in 1971, where he effectively says, we've never talked about statehood, and now people are starting to talk about statehood, and I think I need to ring the alarm about this, right? And he effectively predicts Oslo. 50 years before Oslo, he predicts Oslo. And he said, or 30, 40, whatever, however many years lie between 70 and 94. 24 years before Oslo, he predicts Oslo. And Kanafani basically lays it out. He says the statehood that people are talking about is basically the elimination of the Palestinian liberation movement and the surrender of the Palestinian liberation movement to an Israeli-American Arab dictatorship plan to ensure that Palestinians basically get ghettoized into something that's called a state but has nothing to do with statehood. And he says the other version of statehood is one where we liberate territory, but any territory we liberate is basically a staging ground for the liberation of more territory. That's the only version of statehood that's actually a revolutionary statehood. Anything else is just a capitulation, right? And he was completely right. What Arafat basically did was he passed through, and if you go back to kind of 1974, you see the steps. What he first does is he goes to the Arab dictators and says, look, we're going to basically give up any revolutionary anything, and we're willing to accept to create a new Arab police state, just another Arab dictatorship, on any little piece of Palestine that they'll give us where we're allowed to plant the flag, right? And so the Arab states are like, we've been waiting for this. This is the painkiller that's going to get rid of the headache, which is Palestinians. Because Palestinians have been treated as a headache by Arab regimes since 1948 and until today. Whether they called themselves revolutionary regimes or conservative monarchies or reactionary regimes, they've all treated Palestinians as security issues if they have Palestinian communities within them, from day one. The Arab states then lobbied the United Nations. And so within months of, well, first of all, there's an Arab League summit in Rabat in 1974, where the PLO is recognized as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. Sorry, I should go back. Arafat effectively passes this through the Palestine National Council, through the PLO. It becomes the official policy of the PLO, something called the 10-point program, where he effectively passes through the resolution that says we'll accept a statehood on any piece of Palestine that's liberated, and the means towards this are diplomatic means, that this is an acceptable means of struggle, right? And so once the PNC passes this, the Palestine National Council passes this, he takes it to the Arab states, and the Arab states say, okay, you've eliminated our headache now. So they have the Arab League meeting in Rabat in 1974, just months after the Palestine National Council meeting, where they approve the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. And then they take that to the United Nations, and that's when Arafat gives his famous gun and the olive branch speech at the UN, where basically Palestine is approved as an observer state in the United Nations General Assembly, right? So the same status, I think, as the Red Cross or something. And then that's kind of that key moment of 1974, where there's this switch to a Palestinian liberation organization that's still pretending to advocate the cause, the fundamental cause of Palestinian liberation, which is what? Which is the return of the refugees, right? Let's never forget this, please. I know we talk about the wall and the checkpoints and the genocide. Let's not forget that 2/3 of the population of the Gaza Strip are refugees, that their primary struggle is to go home 15 minutes away on the other side of Israel's genocide wall, right? That the vast majority of Palestinian refugees in the West Bank also live a 20-minute drive from the places they were expelled from. That the core of the Palestinian revolution, whether outside or inside, has always been the refugees. 8 out of every 10 Palestinians are displaced people, right? This is something that, again, when we talk about, this is not to diminish the importance of the military occupation, the apartheid regime, the genocide, the checkpoints, the wall. But fundamentally, the Palestinian liberation movement is a movement for us to go home. Full stop. Right? Everything else stems from that originary point of expelling us. Yeah? This applies to Gaza, it applies to the West Bank, but it also applies to our camps, it also applies to our diaspora, to the dispersal, to people like us. Other than the Fatah and then the Popular Front splits into the Popular Front and the Democratic Front, which are together considered the Palestinian left. Also, there's a historic communist party in Palestine, which plays a pretty important role in mobilizing within the West Bank and Gaza Strip, but was always kind of following the dictates of Moscow and the Soviet Union, and so they were forced to kind of only operate on a two-state model, on the West Bank and Gaza being Palestine at the expense of 48 Palestine. And then never acknowledged the armed struggle. There's another group of factions in the PLO, which are effectively front groups for Arab Arab dictatorships, intelligence services. So the Assad regime in Syria, for example, had 2 front groups that were the Sa'iqa and the PFLP General Command. The Iraqi Ba'ath regime had their intelligence services had another front group in the PLO called Jabhat Tahrir al-Arabiya, the Arab Liberation Front, and so on, right? So this was also another aspect. In 1974, when Arafat passed through that 10-point declaration, all of the left factions left the PLO. They called themselves the Refusal Front, and they set up a kind of parallel organization, but then they re-enter the PLO when Egypt breaks ranks with the rest of the Arab world and signs the Camp David Accords with Israel in the late 1970s. Hamas emerges later. So you have the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine, not really part of the PLO, not really part of anything actually. And in the 80s, they begin to think about what does it look like for us to actually have a militant faction. And so they create a faction called Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, the Islamic Resistance Movement, and Hamas. So this is Hamas. So Hamas is actually an acronym. And then we have another kind of organization that comes in with a very kind of clear militant goal, and that's the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, right? And this was mostly formed by people who were PhD holders, very kind of highly educated individuals who came together around a very kind of Islamic revolutionary, it's kind of a liberation theology version of Islam that with a very kind of tight-knit kind of organizational structure. It's not a mass organization. You don't just join that organization. Whereas with Fatah and with Hamas, it's open to everyone to join. These were mass-based organizations. So when we talk about Hamas, we're really talking about a big movement. We're not talking about a specific kind of political faction that's like highly specialized and very selective in who it allows in. Fatah and Hamas were always aiming to recruit the entirety of the Palestinian population. So these become mass-based, massive organizations. Fatah, from its very beginning, Hamas really just hits the scene in the first Intifada. And the Israelis actually, some people talk about Israel founded Hamas, Israel set up Hamas. This is not true. What is true, however, is that the Israelis were worried about the growth of Fatah. And so what they did do was they facilitated, they weren't as hardcore about repressing Hamas, allowing certain funds to get to them that they would have been able to intercept otherwise, allowing them the freedom to kind of have meetings in the prisons that if it was the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, those meetings would not have happened. This kind of activity of just enabling something which they thought they were doing in a limited fashion, in a way that it would become a contender to Fatah, right? It was never this organization that the Israelis were able to actually dictate anything within. They definitely didn't set it up, right? This is stuff that the enemies of Hamas will talk about, but it's really, really just like unsubstantiated. So Hamas comes in the 90s, and it's this golden moment because Fatah comes in and signs the Oslo agreements and completely splits Palestinian society into those that are going to kind of see themselves as beneficiaries of this Bantustan project, right? This Palestinian surrender through what was called the peace process, which was basically enabling the apartheid regime, establishing a security subcontractor, a first line of defense for Israel, through Palestinian collaboration, right? So the Palestinian Authority is set up as a first line of defense for Israel. The way that Palestinians in the West Bank know that the Israelis are going to enter into Bethlehem or Nablus or any kind of Palestinian area is that you see that the Palestinian police have disappeared, because the Israelis called them first. When a Palestinian organizer or fighter is arrested by the Palestinian Authority and tortured by the Palestinian Authority and interrogated by the Palestinian Authority, if they're let out, they're usually then arrested by the Israelis, and when they go into the Israeli interrogation, everything that they said under Palestinian Authority interrogation is right there in front of them. The Palestinian Authority has handed it to them, right? The Palestinian Authority was always set up to be the first line of defense for the Israeli regime, right? Just like the Bantustan administrations and Bantustan governments in South Africa, just like the tribal councils in the reserves in the United States, just like the band councils in the reservations in Canada, just like whatever it is that they're called in Australia and New Zealand, right? Where you have natives to police natives on behalf of the settler colonial regime. And so in this moment, Hamas realizes that it's through outright continuation of the armed struggle after 1994 that it was going to gain a mass popularity, which worked, right? Because Palestinian society is a society in struggle. We're a society under military occupation, under settler colonialism. Oslo did not end the occupation. It did not bring about the return of the refugees. It didn't return an inch of land to anybody whose land was confiscated. If anything, settlement construction skyrocketed after Oslo. The number of settlers in the West Bank doubled and then tripled and then quadrupled under Oslo. As soon as the Israelis were unhappy with the very limited degree of autonomy that existed within the Palestinian Authority-controlled areas over the course of the 90s, they came in and launched the Second Intifada. I mean, the Israelis started the Second Intifada as a way to wage direct war and reoccupy the West Bank. So some of you maybe remember the Battle of Jenin Camp in 2002, but Jenin Camp was just the kind of most fierce battle amongst hundreds of battles where the Israeli military had reoccupied the entirety of the West Bank and had tried to reoccupy the Gaza Strip. The resistance in the Gaza Strip managed to make the costs of that occupation so high that in 2005 the Israelis had to withdraw from the Gaza Strip and turn it into the world's largest open-air prison. And then those areas that were under Palestinian Authority control in the West Bank were all also transformed into open-air prisons. So like Qalqilia is completely surrounded by the wall with one door, right? One gate. You can, one Israeli soldier can go close the gate and Qalqilia turns from a city into a prison. Like that. But every Palestinian city in the West Bank has from 4 to 8 entry and exit points. You close those, you turn it into a prison. This was from the 90s. This was the strategy. It was very clearly drawn out. It was very talked about, right? So, I mean, have I answered your question?
I think we need to give you a little break, take a breath. And I think I want to open it for questions. If people have any questions, I cannot see because of this light here. So if somebody could take the microphone from me, and I really cannot see. There is two hands there. Let's just start. Two hands at the back. Yeah. At the back.
Sorry. At the back. Someone keep their hand out.
I think I'm going to stand here.
Okay. Hello everyone, I just want to say thank you Hazem, thank you Samira for taking the panel, and thank you everyone for being here. It's beautiful to see so many of us here together, united in our love for liberation. And I want to raise this point that for the last 23 months, we have been bombarded with continuous images of the violence and devastation against the people of Palestine that attempts to disrupt our joy, disrupt our hope, attempts to make us feel hopeless. And all of these images skip over a reality that in the last 23 months, this sliver, 1/5 the size, geographic size of London, comprising 2.2 million people, 50% of whom are children, has been able to unite the people of the world, has been able to defeat all imperialist powers of the world, Britain, America, Germany, France, Japan, Australia, Russia, China, has exposed them, has exposed the lie of their so-called human rights, the lie that any of these countries are democracies, the lie that organizations like the UN or International Criminal Court are have any sort of legitimacy. This is all because of the spontaneous resistance of the Palestinian people that has been able to unite the people of the world together in the face of a common enemy. Okay.
Is there a question?
The question that I want to ask is that this victory that we can see has come about from 100 years of Palestinian people's struggle that has continued, worked hard, worked continuously, and today they have become the symbols for all of us around the world of what resistance and what people's genuine, honest resistance looks like. And yet, with this historical experience of struggle, today in Gaza, the Palestinian people overwhelmingly are unarmed. There is no revolutionary organization in Gaza. There is no mass mobilization of people, as we have seen in instances of liberation in Vietnam, in Algeria, in China, in Russia, in Cuba, etc., that have been able to not just expose, but to defeat and expel. And so my question is, why does this revolutionary movement not exist in Gaza? Why has this movement not been able to develop in Palestine?
Oh, please, yeah, thank you. That's okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how to answer your question. No, just one thing to just note. When we talk about all of the other instances that you're talking about, we're talking about societies. The Palestinian society in Gaza has been placed into an exceptional situation. I'm very anti-exceptionalism. Very. I'm not about any kind of Palestinian exceptionalism. I'm not about any of this kind of stuff. So this is not something that I would normally say. But the situation in Gaza is exceptional. Gaza is not a regular society. Gaza is a concentration camp that has been turned into an extermination camp. In the conditions of a concentration camp and extermination camp, it's too deformed, I think, to think about a truly revolutionary, like whatever that means to you, because the only thing that matters is survival. Survival, I mean, this whole existence is resistance fetish that comes about around the world, it's kind of nonsense. But in Gaza, existence is resistance, right? And so this is really the ceiling. I mean, it's really not even something to cheer. It's a very, very nightmarish situation, right? Where food, water, the air you breathe, the housing, it's all being destroyed in front of you. After 15 years of it also being systematically destroyed, now it's being systematically destroyed in this intensified way. So to think, okay, under these circumstances, I'm going to do what? Like what is the global revolutionary anything? The global revolutionary thing that the population in Gaza is able to do is to stand up to the Israeli military. And in the last 2 days, they took out how many officers and how many tanks and how many soldiers. 2 years into an extermination war, where under the ground they have to build these weapons themselves, with everybody against them, right? Their own population, even in terms of like the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinians, the Israelis have recruited, is this Abu Shabab organization, which is not a big, it's basically a bunch of crooks and smugglers that the Israelis have recruited. The Egyptian regime, which is one of the worst fascist regimes in the world, with tens of thousands of political prisoners that we know nothing about, right? That has closed the border. You have a house on fire, and people are trying to get out. They come and they lock the door and say, give me $10,000, maybe I'll think about letting you out. Per person, right? What revolutionary what? We want them to start developing like a global class analysis. They're talking about like, how many lentils can I find to feed my kid, right? And this is by design. So I would just say like, yes, I mean, but we need to think about what does global revolution look like. We need to encourage that on the outside. But like the question is not why isn't Gaza developing a global, Gaza's bodies is developing a global revolutionary consciousness. What more do you want from them? Like let's chill.
Good, thank you. Any others?
Oh, you've got the mic. There was somebody else there at the back. Here, please. Yeah.
Questions?
And yes, let's keep it to questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Switched off.
Hi Hazem, I'll try and speak up. Can you hear me?
It's switched
Mic's
off.
not working. Hi. Hey Hazem. Hey, thank you for honestly blowing my mind every time. I've got a question which may be unpopular. I know right now we're fighting from the belly of the beast and we're trying to look for leadership. And in the past few months we've had Jeremy Corbyn step up with his new party. But when he was confronted about whether he's anti-Zionist and whether he believes in the two-state solution or one state solution, he was, ambiguous, doesn't want to answer. He's getting confrontational with the people asking him. You've spoken about Ghassan talking about the reactionary leadership in the past who ride the wave of people's pain, and they're behind the people, not in front, but they front as if they're in front, and they have their own agendas and their own, things they want out of it. How do you feel about what Jeremy's doing in light of not being clear about whether he's anti-Zionist and whether he believes in the one party, one state solution or two? Thank you.
Thanks for that. I'm a very firm believer that in movements, not in leaders. I don't believe that we need to, I think we should never have heroes unless they're already dead. And when it comes to politics and political organizing, leaders are there for the people to bash into what they need to be. Right? They're not leaders, they're representatives, and if they don't represent us, then they need to be pressured to represent us properly or to step aside, right? This isn't about Corbyn individually. I'm just talking about in general. We shouldn't look at these people who are called leaders as people who actually are like they lead us. We want them behind us. The leaders are us. The leader is the street. The leader is the people. And we need to have spaces like this where we figure out what it is that represents us, what it is that charts a future that's about our dignity individually and collectively, that charts our liberation individually and collectively. And we need to be clear about what that is, and then we need to push for that. And the people who emerge from these movements as spokespeople, as representatives, as somebody that goes in to speak on our behalf, that shows up on the screen that's supposed to speak on our behalf, then they need to be constantly made accountable to the voice of the street, right? In this particular moment, someone like Jeremy Corbyn is someone who holds that kind of position, right? And so we need to be pressuring Jeremy Corbyn and anybody like Jeremy Corbyn to either kind of take their leadership from the street, take their leadership from the camp, take their leadership from the encampment, take their leadership from the demo, take their leadership from the direct action at the arms factory, take their leadership from the direct action at the Air Force Base, right? And if they're squiggling about, then they need to be set right or set left.
I'd like to add to that. I want to look at it in two ways. One is a little bit of an analogy and an association with the situation with Palestine today. Before 2023, October 23, I could barely hear anybody calling for 1948 as the Palestine state. Everybody would have been very happy with a two-state solution if that was to be granted to Palestinians. 2 years forward, it's exactly the opposite. Everybody has seen how unviable a two-state solution is, and how the only just solution is the total liberation of the Palestinian land. But when I say everybody, I mean everybody like us. People who are not politicians. The politicians speak a different language. And I just think that perhaps, and I say perhaps and I mean perhaps, Corbyn is not yet there at that point where he feels free to communicate that sentiment. So that is maybe my wish and my hope. But the other thing is, we are here in Britain at a point where it might be a junction, you know, where you need to decide whether to go ahead, right, or left. And at this point in time, we actually might see proper change in our electoral system. We might actually, once and for all, get rid of the Tories and of Labour. And the party that is challenging this status quo is this new emergent party. For me, as a British citizen, as a citizen who believes that another system and another world is possible, I do not want to put barriers in front of Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana. I would want them to do their job and form that possibility for us. So that would be my reply to anybody criticizing Corbyn at this point in time.
I will just maybe caveat that with the party that's actually challenging the two-party state is the Reform Party. So just, no, I understand. I just like, let's keep it real also, that like what we are facing is fascism. That's the party that's really been making the inroads. That's the party. If something is able to come out as a counterbalance, it needs to be an accountable counterbalance. It can't be like, just because you're accountable. I know you agree. I just want it said, you know, that we have to hold, anybody who's coming to speak in our name has to consistently and constantly be held accountable. And they don't get a pass because the situation is complicated, right? That voice needs to be, I'm not saying you said that, I'm just saying that like we need to be clear that as soon as we start giving people who are leaders the pass, then we've basically opened the door for them to sell us out. Because the ruling structures are bigger than an individual, they're bigger than a party, they're bigger than a political line, they're bigger than a party newspaper, right? These are billionaires, these are landowners, these are people who can say, well, I'll just move my business elsewhere, go find jobs for the 1 million people that are gonna end up on the street. And it's only by kind of keeping it consistent, keeping it strong, keeping our eyes open, and keeping these people accountable, that we offer that counterbalance to the billionaires, right? And
let me get up to be able to see. Just 1 second. Let me see. There is this person here in the middle. Yeah.
I have the mic. I have the mic already. Thank you very much. Okay. Brilliant talk. I have a question. Okay. I do have a question, that's why I have the mic. Right. The secularism didn't work for Palestinians. Can you hear me? Hello. Yes, you can now. What I was going to say is the resistance didn't work for Palestinians. The compromise didn't work for Palestinians. The Islamism didn't work. The secularism didn't work. What could have they done to avoid it, to withstand the force of a superpower that they just got in front of since 1948? Could they do anything? Could they just do anything better to just withstand? And from now onwards, do they have a choice? What can they do? I'm not talking about us. I'm talking about Palestinians. Is there anything they can do to not to be ethnically cleansed from their land? That's the question.
Yeah. I really don't know how to answer this question. I mean, I can't answer on behalf of people. I can't like theorize. Palestinians in Palestine, in Gaza, in 48, in the West Bank, they know their situation better than I ever will. They know what's possible better than I ever will. So I'm really not in a position to come and be like, this is what Palestinians should do, this is what Palestinians shouldn't do. Some things that are very clear. The Palestinian Authority is part of the Israeli military. It's part of the apparatus of the occupation and this genocidal regime. That's clear. Negotiation with the genocidal regime is negotiation that's conducted from a position of ultimate weakness. Not just because the genocidal regime is militarily so powerful and a nuclear power and all of this military and whatnot, but because it's been granted complete impunity and complete support from basically the entire world. So it's Palestine versus the world. But Palestine here isn't just the Palestinians, it's everybody who wants to fight fascism in the world. It's everybody here is part of Palestine as well. So the question I'm going to kind of throw back at everyone is, if we are Palestine, what can we do better? Right? And that's really the question. We're not in a position to tell Palestinians in Palestine, do this, do that. Palestinians in Palestine have been doing this and that. And they know and they will continue, because it's a matter of survival at that point, right? This is not just about like lofty goals of utopia. This is really about just living until tomorrow, living until next year, existing in 5 years. For us out here, we still have a little bit of breathing room. Yes, we're in fascism, but we can have this assembly and the cops haven't come in and bashed all of our heads in, right? Okay, what are we using this space for? Yeah, and that's why this camp is so important. That's why all of the spaces we're able to come together and have structured conversations are so important. Because these are conversations where we can think about, okay, what can we do with what's left of the space for us to organize within? Before it's taken away, because really it's use it or lose it. This is the moment of use it or lose it. If we don't use the space and the power that we have right now, it's being taken away from us as we speak. Right? So that's where the question should be. I think starting to try to theorize about what can Palestinians do different and what can Palestinians do better. Okay, let's say we agreed, me and you. This is what they can do. Why does that matter? How does that affect anything? Are we going to publish it as an article? Okay, who's going to read that article? Well, what is the goal of that question and whatever answer I give you? I can have opinions about what can be done different, what can be done counterfactually, about moving forward, etc. All of us can. None of that matters if we're not there and actually trying to organize. But we're here. We're physically right here, right? Our bodies are here, our minds are here, our energies are here, our ability to have these spaces are here. This is what we need to talk about. What do we do with this space? So that's what I kind of give back to you with this.